People ask me sometimes what it was like. I tell them it was a Tuesday. That's not a joke. It was, in fact, Tuesday by the Accord's standard calendar, which runs on a 30-hour cycle and labels its days with color designations nobody can actually pronounce. Blue 7, whatever that means. A Tuesday. I had been posted to the Vareth Compact's third-tier diplomatic station for 11 months by that point. My official role was cultural liaison, which is the polite way of saying I attended a great many functions where nobody wanted to speak to me directly, and I translated the silences into actionable briefs for the mission team. I was good at the job. I had been doing variations of it for 23 years, on 4 continents and then 2 star systems. And by the time they asked me to come in for what they called a routine compatibility survey, I had learned to read a room the way most people read a text message. Quickly, without thinking about it, and with a fairly receivable sense of whether what was being communicated was what was actually meant. They called it a cultural compatibility survey. I want to be precise about that, because the phrase matters. Not a psychological assessment, not a behavioral evaluation, a compatibility survey, form, routine paperwork, the kind of thing you sit through and sign and forget. I noticed 3 things before I crossed the threshold. The first was the chamber itself. I had been in the Compact's standard administrative spaces before. Low ceilings, ambient sound baffling, warm spectrum lighting calibrated for their visual comfort range. This room had a ceiling roughly 4 meters higher than it needed to be. Neutral spectrum lighting and acoustic properties that told me, very clearly, that the space had been designed to minimize any advantage a subject might gain from echo or ambient noise. That's not an administrative design. That's a test environment design. Someone had put thought into what not to give me. The second was the arrangement of the observers. There were 7 of them seated in a curved row behind a translucent partition that was just opaque enough to suggest it was one way. It was not one way. I could see them perfectly well. They were seated at careful, irregular intervals, not the shoulder-to-shoulder arrangement of a panel waiting for a presentation, spaced in a pattern I recognized after about 4 seconds. They were positioned to triangulate eye contact angles. Someone wanted to know where I looked, and when, and how long I held it. That's not a form review. That's an observational array. The third was the lead researcher. I will call him Dr. Voreth, because that is approximately what his name sounded like to a human ear, and because his actual designation involves a tonal register I cannot reproduce in writing. He greeted me at the entrance with a prepared warmth that was approximately 2 degrees, too calibrated to be spontaneous. His secondary hands, the Compact's equivalent of fidget behavior, were still, completely still, which meant he was actively suppressing them, which meant he was nervous about something, and the something was me. And the effort of concealing it was consuming attention he would otherwise have used to make the greeting feel natural. I sat down. I folded my hands. I said I was glad to be there. They had built what I later confirmed was a comprehensive behavioral prediction model of human cognition. Not a crude one. A real one, multi-layered, cursive, fed from 40-plus years of recorded human interaction with Compact diplomatic staff. They had been building it for nearly a decade. The compatibility survey was its field calibration test. The goal, as best I could reconstruct it afterward, was to run a live human subject through a structured set of conversational prompts and environmental variations, and measure how closely her responses matched model predictions. A pass meant the model was solid. A significant deviation meant the model needed adjustment. I want to be fair to them. The test was sophisticated. The prompts were subtle. The environmental variations, a shift in the room's humidity level at the 20-minute mark, a slight change in the pitch of the background frequency, I wasn't so supposed to consciously notice. 2 observers who switched positions during a 3-minute segment when I was looking at a document were genuinely elegant. Not obvious. Not heavy-handed. The sort of thing that a subject who wasn't paying attention would register only as vague unease, which was probably the intent. Generate mild stress. Measure the stress response. Compare to model. Clean experiment. I was paying attention. By the 40-minute mark, I had identified 9 distinct test vectors. By 90 minutes, I had 14, and I had a working hypothesis about the underlying model architecture they were using. It had a particular signature, a tendency to weight verbal response latency very heavily, which told me the model had been built primarily from recordings of formal diplomatic exchanges, and not from anything resembling casual conversation. Humans, when they trust the environment, respond faster. When they don't, they slow down, but not in the way the model predicted. The model predicted latency as a function of deliberate concealment. In practice, human latency under stress is more often a function of sensory overload. We are taking in too much, not hiding too much. Different mechanism, similar surface signature. Easy to confuse if your dataset is limited. That gap was why the model kept producing predictions I could feel the room betting on half a second before I did the thing they weren't betting on. It happened 11 times in the 3-hour session. I counted. At the close of the session, Dr. Vorath thanked me with the same calibrated warmth he had opened with, and told me the results would be processed, and that I would be contacted if any follow-up was required. I told him that was very kind, told him I had prepared something for him. I handed him 4 pages of handwritten notes. I had been given paper and a stylus at the outset, ostensibly for my own use during the document review segments, which were themselves a test vector, number 3 on my list. The notes were a summary of his experimental protocol. 14 test vectors described in sequence, timestamps at which I had identified each one. A brief structural analysis of what I believed the underlying model was doing, and where its training data was likely concentrated. 3 specific recommendations for how to close the latency prediction gap if they intended to continue the research. And a note at the bottom, which I will reproduce here as closely as I can remember it, because I think the phrasing is worth preserving. Recognize that this assessment was designed to measure predictive model accuracy against a live human subject. I hope the results are useful. For what it's worth, I did not find the test unpleasant. You are very careful researchers, and the acoustic calibration in particular was well done. I noticed it at approximately 8 minutes. If you revise the protocol for future subjects, you may wish to vary the humidity shift timing. It anchors the mid-session transition too reliably, and any subject who has spent time in pressurized environments will likely key on it. I was not trying to be unkind. I want to be clear about that. I had spent 23 years in rooms where the goal was to understand the other party before they finished their first sentence, and the notes were the most genuine form of professional courtesy I could offer. If someone had spent a decade building a model of how I think, the least I could do was tell them where the model was wrong. Dr. Vorath held the pages for a long time without speaking. The secondary hands, the ones he had held so carefully still at the beginning of the session, moved once, and then went still again. I thanked him for his hospitality. I left. The compatibility survey was never formally concluded. My mission contacts told me 3 weeks later that the compact had quietly suspended the behavioral modeling project for human subjects, pending a methodological review. I was not told what the review concluded. I was not asked to participate in it, which I thought was probably wise of them. I still have the stylus they gave me. It sits on my desk at home now, next to a photograph of the team from my 3rd posting and a small piece of basalt I picked up from a beach, on a world whose name I am not permitted. Publish. I look at the stylus sometimes and think about those 3 hours, and the 11 moments when the room went very quiet in a particular way, the way rooms go quiet when something has not gone according to the model. It was a Tuesday, blue 7, whatever that means. Made myself some tea when I got back to the mission building, and I wrote my brief, and I went to bed at a reasonable hour. That was all it was.